This is a picture of me on March 1st. Little did I know the next time I'd be walking as a free woman would be towards the end of April. So this is my complicated birth story. So my name is Dr. Summer. I'm an embryologist and a fertility coach, and this is my complicated pregnancy and birth story. The only reason I'm doing this is because I grew up with YouTube when I was in my 20s, and I was actually pregnant twice in my 20s, and it was very popular at that time to have loads of people share their birth stories, and they always went something like this. Oh, I had a lovely pregnancy, I felt energetic and I was glowing and I had so much energy, I was cleaning the house all the time, I went to get ice cream with my partner, and then I sneezed and my water broke. So then I went to the hospital, then I fell asleep, and then I woke up and it was time to push, and then 10 minutes later my baby Dylan was born. They kind of felt, well, they probably didn't go like that, but it felt like that was the pregnancy and birth stories I was consuming at the time. And I remember, I was really upset after I had my first two because they were quite complicated pregnancy and deliveries. And I was like, oh my God, is there something wrong with me? I had C-sections. I couldn't even do a natural birth. I did feel less of a woman for it. But then I was like, do you know what? Every pregnancy and birth is a success, okay? Because everyone's experience is different. And me and my babies were healthy, and that's the most important thing. And I just reshifted my mindset and I felt better about it. But I do think there is this whole agenda to kind of push natural, unmedicated births on women. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I just think a lot of women need medical intervention. Like back in the day, before modern medicine was this advanced towards maternal health, people like me would have died. I would have died. I probably wouldn't have even made it past the first pregnancy. I would have been dead. So there is a time and a place for medical intervention, and it does save lives. It definitely saved my life and my baby's life, so I'm eternally grateful for that. But I just think we need to kind of talk about different birth stories, because not all pregnancies and deliveries are super easy. Let's get into it. So my baby's currently 6 months old. So I gave birth 6 months ago, and this was my third pregnancy. So this baby was conceived through IVF. So it took me 2 years to even get pregnant in the first place. And if you want to watch about my fertility struggles, I'll put the link up here. And the pregnancy up until, I'd say, 29 weeks, it was a pretty normal pregnancy. So my first two pregnancies were in my early to mid 20s, and then this pregnancy was in my late 30s. So they're very different experiences just because there was such a big gap. And obviously in your 30s, your body isn't as robust as it is in its 20s. But surprisingly, up until 29 weeks, I actually had quite an easy pregnancy. So my first two pregnancies, I'd experienced hyperemesis gravidarum. My first pregnancy, I actually lost a stone in the first trimester. I couldn't even keep water down. I was vomiting at least 2 or 3 times an hour, and I did have to go into hospital for IV fluids. My second pregnancy, I actually stayed sick up until 4 to 5 months. It wasn't as intense. I could keep water down, but not much food down, and it did last a bit longer. So this pregnancy, I got morning sickness, but I only got sick once or twice a day. And then some days I didn't even get sick. And because I had 4 miscarriages before, at the back of my head, I was like, oh my God, I don't think this pregnancy is going to work out, because nobody can, I've never experienced a pregnancy where I wasn't puking my guts out every hour. So the first trimester, I was very anxious because, it was an IVF baby. I had a history of miscarriage. I was an older mom. So my chances of a repeat miscarriage were actually quite high. But then around 15 to 16 weeks, when I started to feel the baby kick, that's when my anxiety kind of left, because I could feel the baby move. I was like, okay, it's doing well. And I was happy. And I was really active during that pregnancy. I'd go biking, I'd go swimming, I'd do lots of activities. My energy levels were back after the first trimester, and I actually had an easy pregnancy. I didn't really have any issues. I had normal pregnancy issues like heartburn and all that stuff, but it wasn't, a really tough pregnancy. So the 1st of March, my husband had to go to Jordan for work, and I decided to join him and do maybe a little baby moon before the baby was born. So we went to the Dead Sea, and we spent 1 day at this hotel. And then he got a call from work, and they were like, I know you're on annual leave, but we need you back because there's an issue at work. So we had to cut our holiday short. We spent literally 24 hours there, and we had to go back to Amman, which is the capital of Jordan. That's when everything started to unravel in this pregnancy. So that was the second day of Ramadan, and we were having iftar at friends.
Yummy.
And then after iftar, I went to the toilet, and there was like lots of blood like coming out of me, and I was like, oh, what the hell? Like, oh my God. So there was like no pain, nothing, just lots of blood. So I went to my husband. I was like, I need to go to hospital now. So we were with friends, and they were very kind. They drove us immediately to the nearest maternity hospital, and I went in, and I was like, I was so scared. My heart was probably going like 200 miles an hour. So they did an ultrasound, and the baby was okay. And then they just did a lot of examinations and ultrasounds, and then they discovered that I had Placenta Previa. So they did an internal examination to see if my cervix was, opening or not, if there were signs of me going into labor. There wasn't, but because there was quite a significant amount of blood, they were like, you need to stay in hospital for a while just to monitor and evaluate what's going on. So I was like, okay. So I stayed in hospital for a few days, and luckily enough, I didn't have a second bleed. So I was like, okay, I want to go home. And I had a flight booked for, I think this happened on a Monday, and I had a flight booked on the Friday. And basically, I wanted to fly back to Cairo. So everything was good. And then the Friday morning, when I was supposed to fly back, I had another bleed. It wasn't as intense as the first one. So I stayed home, and I just kind of monitored the situation. I was like, if it gets worse, I'll go to the hospital. But if it kind of tapers off, I'll just stay put. So I was on bed rest and monitoring the situation, and nothing happened. But just because I was so scared something would happen, I might stay in Jordan for an extra week or two. And yeah, I was just going to the hospital all the time, making sure everything was okay, blah, blah, blah. And then after 2 weeks, I was very stable. Nothing happened. So they gave me the green light to go back to Cairo. So I spent 3 days at home in Cairo, and I actually booked a pregnancy photo shoot during that time, and I'm super lucky that I did, because I wouldn't have had a chance to do it later on. And I was due to fly to Ireland, so I did another ultrasound. The doctor was like, everything's okay. I had a doctor's note that I could fly, and then I flew to Ireland. So this is me flying back to Ireland. So the reason why I had to go to Ireland was because I was doing a Master's of Public Health at the time, and I had to do qualitative interviews with people for my dissertation, and it was just easier if I was in Ireland at the time, and I'd wanted to give birth in Ireland anyway. Regarding paperwork, it was just easier to do it in Ireland than Jordan or Cairo. So I went to Ireland, and we got off the plane, and we were renting a place beside St. Stephen's Green, and we arrived one day before St. Patrick's Day. So there's lots of activities in the park. So we were like, let's go for a walk. Let's see what's going on. The city was buzzing. I think it was a Sunday or a Saturday evening. So we went to St. Stephen's Green, and we were walking. Then I felt like something wet come out of me. And I initially thought I'd wet myself, and I was like, oh, this is weird. I know you can get a leaky bladder with pregnancy, but I've never had this before. And it just felt like a lot of fluid was coming out of me, and I was like, oh my God, did I really wet myself? So I just was like, okay, I'll just keep walking, and I'll go to the nearest bathroom. But I just felt a lot of gushing fluid come out of me. So I was wearing black leggings at the time, and I just kind of put my hand where the wetness was, and then I put my hand up, and it was covered in red. I was like, shit, this isn't piss, this is blood. I need to go to a hospital ASAP. And we just come off the plane from Cairo, and we didn't have any SIM cards that worked in Ireland, and we didn't have any Wi-Fi, so we couldn't order a taxi or an Uber or anything. So we went straight out of the park, and my husband literally just went like this to the nearest taxi, and he was like, we need to go to the hospital. And he put his coat down on the taxi seat, and I sat on it, and I was bleeding a lot. And I was like, take me to the hospital. So he took me to the Rotunda Hospital. And by the time I'd reached the hospital, it was a very short drive. I'd say from St. Stephen's Green to the Rotunda, it's maximum 10 minutes. But by that time, his coat was soaked in blood. And then I went to the Rotunda, and I was like, I'm 31 weeks pregnant, and I'm bleeding like crazy. And they're like, oh, have a seat. I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's a lot. And I showed them the coat, and it was soaked with blood, and they were like, okay. And they took me to the emergency department. And then when the nurses saw the amount of blood that was coming out of me, they just stripped me and they were just prepping me for a C-section basically. I was super scared. It was only when they did the ultrasound and the baby was okay that I managed to calm down, but I was still bleeding quite a lot. And they did an examination, internal examination, and I wasn't going into labor or anything. So I told them that I had placenta previa and I was stable for the last 2 to 3 weeks. So I was admitted to hospital and then they started doing a lot of investigations. I'd lost a lot of blood. Like the first bleed I had in Jordan, I probably lost like only 200 or 300 milliliters of blood, but this was a big bleed. It was at least, like what the nurses said anyway, it was at least 500 to 600 millimeters of blood. So I actually don't know how the pregnancy wasn't affected because it was just so much blood everywhere. So I was admitted to hospital and I was told to fast just in case I needed an emergency C-section. I was just monitored every hour for the next 12 hours. And thankfully the bleeding stopped and everything was good. Baby was good. Heart rate was good. My blood pressure was good. So they were like, okay, you probably won't have a C-section now. We'll try to keep you in and hopefully you won't have another bleed. And we want you to stay pregnant, hopefully to make it to the 32-week mark, because apparently if you make it to 32 weeks, just the chances of complications from a premature delivery are much less. And I was 31 weeks at the time. So I was like, okay, hopefully I'll make it to 32. So in the beginning, they told me I'd only need to be in hospital for 5 days. But then after the 5 days, they told me you'll need to be in hospital until you give birth. And I was like, what? I was like so shocked because it was so tough living in the prenatal ward because I was just put with all the people who were in labor. So you get no sleep. First of all, there was 12 people in the room and they had to do monitors and blood pressure checks to everyone. So just people walking in the sound and machines and then people going into labor. I couldn't get any sleep and it was very intense. Luckily though, I had health insurance. I'd gotten health insurance 18 months before because I thought I needed to do another cycle of IVF. So I was like, I might as well get insurance so it can cover it for me. And I was able to get a private room and it made such a difference because I actually ended up spending 5 weeks in the Rotunda, 5 full weeks. So I stayed in the hospital and they did loads of tests on me. They did ultrasounds and they did blood tests. They did everything under the roof. They left no stone unturned. So it transpired that I had something called complete placenta previa, which means my placenta was completely covering the cervix, and because the placenta shifts as the baby grows, it got displaced and that's what caused the bleeding. And they're very complicated pregnancies because you can't give birth vaginally because there's an actual physical placenta obstructing the birth canal, and there is a higher chance of bleeding and complications and all that kind of stuff. So they were counseling me for a complicated delivery. They were also counseling me that I might have a baby that might need a lot of medical attention when it's born because they thought I wouldn't make it past 32 or 34 weeks, and that is quite premature. So I think that was the hardest part, being counseled for having a baby that would need a lot of medical intervention as soon as it was born. It was very tough few weeks, especially talking to the people at NICU. They're like, this could happen, this could happen. And I know they talk only about worst case scenarios to prep the parents, but it's still very hard. No pregnant woman wants to hear that their babies might need X, Y, Z, So that mentally was very tough for me. And after they did thorough investigations, they discovered that part of my placenta was placenta accreta, which is actually quite a serious condition. So basically, placenta accreta means your placenta is really stuck to your uterine wall. I did a video about thin endometrium, and there are a few studies that I found that maybe thin endometrium can lead to placenta accreta. Is that the reason why I had it? I don't know. Maybe because I had 2 C-sections before and the placenta was stuck to the scars, maybe that was a contributing factor. So basically I had a placenta previa with half of the placenta being placenta accreta, and that just put me in a total different high risk category because having placenta accreta means there's a very high chance that you'll need a hysterectomy when you're doing the C-section. And there's a very, very chance of bleeding out which is why they do the hysterectomy if the bleeding becomes uncontrollable. So I was going in thinking this would be a super straightforward delivery because I had 2 previous C-sections, so I'd have to have another C-section. I just thought they'd cut open, in, out, stitch, that's it. But apparently, no. There was a chance that I'd need a hysterectomy with this pregnancy. There was a chance they'd have to do something called a T-incision. So rather than just a small incision on your lower belly, they do a small incision and a line up to your belly button as well. And there was a chance that they'd need to remove my uterus, and there was a chance that I'd need to have a blood transfusion during the procedure because my chances of bleeding out would be quite high. So I was like a wreck because if you're pregnant, you're already kind of emotional, but there's just kind of processing all of that. I was really upset. I was just like, I don't want any of this. I just want a normal C-section. I'm like, I don't want to deal with this drama. I found it very difficult to kind of wrap my head around it the first few days. But then I was like, do you know what? If me and the baby end up being happy and healthy, it doesn't matter what my belly looks like, what happens in surgery, there's more important things in life. So they wanted to see how long I'd last without bleeding, and they were preparing like a whole surgical team to be on call the day that I was having my surgery. They wanted to have 2 consultants, a consultant anesthesiologist, because they wanted me under spinal because the chances of bleeding are less. But then if something went wrong and they'd need a hysterectomy or just something went wrong, they'd put me under general. They had someone from NICU up because most likely my baby would be premature. They had someone from the blood transfusion team because there was a high chance I'd need a blood transfusion. So doing the C-section, there was like a lot of people in the room. And I was so nervous. I spent the whole time very anxious. And I was like, guys, you need to give me something for the anxiety if you're going to do the C-section without me going crazy. So I don't know what they gave me, but they gave me like the IV equivalent of a Xanax. And that made me so happy and calm. I'll put a picture here of when I had my C-section because I sent this picture out to people after the baby was born. And everyone was like, oh my God, you look so good. You look so calm and happy. And I was like, I was high as fuck. There was no way in hell that I would have been this zen and serene if I hadn't had the IV tranquilizers, basically. So that really helped. I was so happy that they gave me something for the anxiety because I feel like a lot of doctors are just kind of suck it up kind of thing, but they really did factor in my well-being into the equation, which I was super grateful for. So I actually didn't have another major bleed until 35 weeks, and then they decided that they would do an elective C-section at 35 weeks because the day that they picked was the day when all these people were available, and they said if we push it towards 36, 37, that's when things start to get a bit gnarly. So I was like, okay, I was in hospital already for a month at that time, so I was like ready and done with it. So the day of delivery went well, and luckily enough, I actually didn't need a hysterectomy or a T-shape incision. I just had a normal C-section. I lost a lot of blood, so I lost almost a liter of blood during the operation, but I didn't need a blood transfusion because when I was pregnant, I was severely anemic and I had IV iron infusion, so I think my iron stores were quite high because of that. So thankfully, I didn't need any blood transfusions, and yeah, that was good. My baby did need to go into NICU for a few days, so he had issues with breathing and he needed a CPAP, and I think actually having my baby in the NICU was harder than me staying in hospital for the whole 4 weeks. I couldn't even hold him for the first day and a half, and then when we went in, we could only put our finger in the little cubby hole in the incubator and just kind of, stroke his shoulder. It was really sad, and it really affected me. Going to my room after having the C-section, having an empty cot next to me, I felt it was so depressing. I was just like, I wanted to cry, but I was in so much pain from the C-section. Crying actually hurt, so I was like crying in my head, but not outside. And I think that was the hardest part. And I think it really affected my milk supply because it just didn't come in. And I think it's because I wasn't able to hold the baby for the first 2 days. And when I was holding the baby, it was only for, 10 minutes or half an hour a day, basically, because he was in NICU and I had to be wheeled down to go to NICU, and then I was in so much pain I actually couldn't sit with the baby for more than 10 minutes. That was the hardest part of the whole experience, just having the baby in NICU. And my physical recovery as well, I found it very tough. Like, I had 2 C-sections before, but I found the recovery for this one particularly like painful. So the way after you do surgery, you're supposed to walk. So I pushed myself a lot. Like, I had to walk. I walked up and down the corridor twice, but I was in so much pain. And my body doesn't react well to pain. Nobody believes me, because I was in so much pain. My blood pressure the next day plummeted down to like 80/50, and I was just so dizzy because I was in so much pain. So they gave me IV fluids to put my blood pressure back up, and then more pain medication, and then that kind of helped. But like, just even like getting out of bed to be wheeled down to the NICU, it was just so much pain. Like, I'd have to just rest for an hour afterwards because it was just so painful. And I remember at that time, one of the nurses said something to me, "Oh, you're still being wheeled down 2 days after the C-section." She's like, "Oh, you should get up and walk now." But I was like, I physically can't. If anyone knows me, for me even to accept being wheeled on a wheelchair, like, it took a lot of resistance from me, because I did try to walk to the NICU, but it was really far away from my room, and I physically couldn't. I was just in so much pain, so I had to be wheeled down. But I just think people should be a bit careful with words. Why would someone say something like that to someone? And I was really upset about it, because like, I just felt she was like judging me for being lazy, but I wasn't really being lazy. I was just recovering from a major abdominal surgery. And what I took away from that particular experience was, never say anything that can be unkind. Never say anything unkind or that can be, hurtful to someone's feelings, especially if they're vulnerable, like, sick, post-op, whatever, because it's just pointless. To be fair, everyone at the Rotunda was super nice during my whole stay. It was just that comment that sent me to tears at the time, but everyone was super nice. I couldn't have been more grateful. Like, when you're staying for a super long time in a hospital, the people around you do make a difference. It was my birthday as well when I was in the hospital, and the nurses found out because my date of birth was on the charts, and like, they did decorations for me. They got me like a little cake. It was really nice, and I'm always going to be super grateful for the nurses on the prenatal ward in the Rotunda. They really made my time much easier, given I was in such a difficult situation. So my baby was in the NICU for a few days, and it was so tough because like, every time we touch him, the lines and the cables would fall out, and then like, all these machines would start beeping, and you're like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" And one of the doctors was like, "Oh, he's not able to breathe on his own. He might have to stay a bit longer." And I was super worried, super anxious. And we were just like, I hope he pulls through. But funnily enough, the day after he said that comment, the next day he just magically got better. He started breathing on his own. Then they took him from like the high risk part of the NICU to the part of the NICU ward where the babies didn't need CPAP machines and they could breathe independently. But then he was there 2 days. He had like jaundice and a lot of preemie baby stuff. And then afterwards they took him up, and I remember the day he came up to my room, it was such a good day. I felt like, oh, finally we can kind of, bond together. It was super nice. And then afterwards we went home. So yeah, that was my journey. So from March 1st up until, I don't know, the end of April was when I was released from hospital. I spent most of the time in hospital except those few days in Cairo. And that is my complicated birth story. I hope this resonated or made someone feel less alone with their complicated birth and delivery experience. And if you do have kind of an unusual or complicated birth story, please share in the comments and let me know. Okay, bye.